Hello everyone, I'm going to be doing a weak spot kind of overview for the T26E5 Patriot and also for the standard T26E5. Now, this is going to correspond with a article on my website, wattguru.com. It'll be linked at the end of the video and in the video description below for the T26E5 here. Alright, so let's pull up the first image here. I had to kind of edit it a little bit because I based the weak spot guide off of the kind of Christmas slash winter garage, and the view on it is a little bit different as far as how far and close to you are to the tank. But got it to line up the best I could here in this video. But looking at it from the front, you'll notice the areas are green, yellow, orange, and red. The green areas go up to 179 millimeters effectiveness, yellow 204, orange 239, and red all the way up to 700, but most are anywhere from 240 to about 280ish as far as the spots, and then a couple listed here reach around 300ish, but more or less the tank's frontal armor here. So starting out, let's just start out with the obvious lower plate here. So it's not necessarily just one flat lower glacis. The center here, looking over on this side, it's a little bit hard for me. There we go. Lower glacis center, where the mouse is at right now, is 173 millimeters effective with its armor. Now you have a couple little angled sections next to there as it transitions to the lower glacis center edge here, the yellow spot, which goes up to 183. So not that much stronger, which as far as the EA, it means effective armor values of my guides, that basically takes into account the slope of the tank. It does not take into account normalization, since that's different for AP, APCR, and heat, but more or less heat shells will have to penetrate the effective armor here because they don't normalize. Same with HE. APCR doesn't normalize as much as AP, but more or less it gives you a general sense of the actual strength of the armor. And then as you move further out, you have another little angled section. So it's just a little bit stronger. Essentially, it adds, just about enough to give it right to the 200 millimeter effective armor value. Sometimes a pinch less, but I decided to make it orange because nonetheless it is stronger than armor around it. And then on the outside here, the lower glacis outside edge, you start out at the top here, 192 millimeters effective, then it drops to 166 and 177 towards the bottom. So really, if you're aiming at the lower plate, you're going to want to focus on the yellow and the green spots, less about the orange, because more or less you have a higher chance to bounce there, especially if you're a lower tier tank. But even considering the lower glacis, it's the main weak spot on the front, it's still pretty strong against tier 6 and tier 7 tanks, and if you're close to it, you're going to be firing down at it, so it's harder to actually damage. Now the upper glacis here, you have a couple spots of note. The actual upper glacis is 219 millimeters effective. The little clan emblem area, as I called it, is 237. Even though it's flat, it's actually stronger because it's thicker than the actual upper glacis. And the machine gun hole is at 205, so that's the weakest spot on the upper glacis, but it's still pretty strong for a tier 8. Now, just pumping up or punching out a little bit more, whatever. You have the essentially the turret ring area, but it's not necessarily just the turret ring. Basically, right underneath the mantlet, not hitting the top of the hole and trying not to hit too far low. You're aiming at the turret ring, but you're aiming mainly under the mantlet. This area here is 191 to 202 millimeters effective, so pretty weak for a lot of tanks that the Patriot faces, and fairly easy to hit. You just don't want to hit the upper hole, you don't want to hit the mantlet. The mantlet itself is pretty damn strong. The weakest area is 279 millimeters effective, and it goes all the way up, especially on the edges. Now, you do have a couple little spots turret front to the left and right of the mantlet. They're basically the closest that you can shoot to it without actually hitting it. That's 222 millimeters effective, looking dead on. And then above the mantlet, there's a small little strip that's 199 millimeters effective. These areas, they're weak, especially when you think about like comparing them to like the T32 that the Patriot T26E5 is compared to. These areas are much weaker. And then finally, it's a little bit hard to see here. Like, I'll zoom in a little bit afterwards. I just don't want to mess up the specific view I have here. There's a small little bar running across the top of the turret. That's pretty damn strong. That goes anywhere from 232 up to 274 millimeters effective armor. And, it can be a little bit higher than that in some spots, depending on the angle. Towards, like, the edges, it's stronger. So, while it is a somewhat viable weak spot, it's still pretty damn strong for anything outside of like gold rounds or tier 9 and 10 tanks shooting it. The cupola, surprisingly, is pretty damn strong. Like, I'm gonna have to zoom in here to kind of illustrate the effectiveness. Like, it's definitely gonna mess up this image in the center, but more or less the cupola, looking at it here, you have a very small strip along the bottom where my mouse is. That area in the center basically is 182 millimeters effective at the bottom. So on this little image here, that little small yellow strip, above that, it's angled pretty heavily. And, it's pretty damn strong. You're not going to want to shoot there. And then towards the top, the angle decreases a little bit. And it's that little orange blip there. It's a lot easier to see in my actual weak spot guide article than here in the video for the cupola. And that's 205 millimeters effective. But basically, the only spots you're going to want to shoot in the cupola are just at the top of the turret roof, where it's flat here, but not too far towards the edges, and basically right in the center towards the top. So very small. And once you get outside of those areas, or if you hit the center here, the armor's pretty damn strong. It's basically, it goes up to 430 and 700 millimeters plus as far as the effective armor values. But basically, if you're looking at missing these small little spots here in the center, you're looking at minimal about 200 and I would say about 40 millimeters effective armor, and it starts to skyrocket because it's angled heavily and it's pretty thick. So almost don't shoot at the cupola unless you can hit it where you want to, or if you're shooting like tier 10 or heat rounds, stuff like that. All right, so let's move on to the side of the Patriot here. Hopefully I can get it leveled or, kind of lined up pretty easily here. Here we go. But the side armor, it's pretty it's pretty weak compared to the front. Again, much clearer to see in the actual guide. It's a little bit washed out here because I had to kind of clip basically the edges of this image to make it fit because of the different garages. But more or less the entire side is pretty darn weak, especially the side hull. Even the turret armor across most of it. Basically from this side, the armor starts at 190.5 millimeters and drops back to 101.6 as you get towards the rear of the tank. For most 8s and up, you can start shooting right about halfway back from the eagle back and you're fine, outside of a couple little angled sections. The cupola is the same strength as the front because it's essentially the same thickness, same angles all around. It's actually a pretty well modeled cupola compared to some others where they simplify it and give it more basically simplified angles rather than having it be like a circle. And pretty much you're not going to struggle penetrating the side of this unless you hit like the angled hole that kind of bends around to the side, or you shoot at the front of the turret. Now I will click out and get rid of this only because from this side of the turret it is different. You don't have the banding like you saw on the other side with a bunch of bands going back. It's a little bit more simplified, and it's actually stronger than the other side back to this point where it does weaken, but it's still pretty weak. Tier 8s and up will be able to penetrate it, as long as if you don't shoot the angled sections towards the front. Now finally, the rear of the tank, no surprise, it's going to be pretty weak here. I'm just going to get this as close as possible, but again, the garages are different. Really here, pretty much hit anywhere on the side. or not the side, the rear. Except for there's a couple little angled sections that'll pose some trouble for tier 6s, tier 7s, low penetrating tier 8 shots. And then the underbelly almost of the turret is a bit strong, and the angled sections in the cupola pretty much hit the the flat, weak, thin areas on the back. The turret roof on the back is 25 millimeters thick, so pretty much anything can overmatch it that faces it. And the engine deck is 22.2 millimeters thick, so pretty much, again, anything can overmatch it. So just don't aim at the turret and you're going to be fine. Now, the armor as a whole, is pretty damn good. It's a little bit less than the T32, a little bit better than the M26. Like I was kind of pointing out, you can kind of see a little bit better here how basically the lower glacis has this slight little angles in a couple sections that you're going to want to avoid. But when they're angled like this, you can hit them and you'll penetrate it pretty easily. If you can't hit the side for whatever reason, you can shoot the flat area here, try to shoot the flat area of the machine gun port. But what I was kind of talking about, the turret, I guess kind of getting a decent angle here, you're not going to want to hit this area, but basically the turret ring is very small on this tank, but basically landing any shot underneath the mantlet here, you can kind of see the little area, very weak and easy to damage. If you find yourself in a situation where you can't shoot the cupola and for whatever reason don't have enough gun depression to hit the hole and be able to penetrate it, try to shoot underneath the gun if possible, or also these flat sections next to the mantlet or above it. They're pretty easy spots to hit compared to trying to land some shots on the cupola, which is extremely strong like the T32s. So anyway, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Feel free to check out the full guide on my website, wattguru.com. It's going to be popping up here probably any second if it hasn't already, linking over to the actual guide, and it's also in the video description below. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully this helped you out a bit. Have a good day.